better to do.
Hey everybody, welcome to Nothing Better to Do podcast, season 1, episode 1, with your hosts Rich and Sean. On today's show, we have a special guest, Dan from Racetraitor.
Sure.
Rich, do you want to hype him up a little bit?
This is weird to say, and I'm sure shit like this happens to all of us because we're in our 40s or very close to it. I've known Dan half my life, more than half my life, which is fucking weird, like really weird. But yeah, I've known him 25 years, 26, 25, probably about 25 years.
Yeah.
And I briefly played music with him. And he's a solid thinking man, and I think this will be an interesting conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
So, I mean, I'm going to start off I'm a Chicagoan, and I remember when Racetraitor started. It was a much different time. You know, a lot of things that you said are, at least in the scene, are much more accepted than they were back in the 90s.
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
a fair statement?
Absolutely.
You know, we were all much younger men then. And so how has your approach to spreading the message of Racetraitor changed since, you know, back in the 90s to
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, you know, coming back to playing shows, it was definitely a moment where we, you know, I mean, like, we have connections in the scene and we're around, but maybe not like, you know, at varied levels. You know, I was definitely at the point where I was probably going to shows more just because that's, you know, like a lot of my friends are there, but not really finger on the pulse of what's happening. And so we didn't know what to expect coming back in, and we had a lot of conversations about that. Our approach, I feel like our approach kind of picked up where the band left off, which is that as the band went on in the 90s, we were just figuring out the right amount of confrontation and tension versus also wanting to like rally and inspire. Because I think what we found on our last tour as a band in the 90s was that there were people that supported us that like we never really imagined would support us. And so, or were sort of into what we were doing. They might not have quite gotten what it was, but they were definitely enthusiastic. And so we were like, okay, we don't want to like, I don't know if you saw us in the beginning, but like the very beginning, we were like extremely confrontational. We will go.
I can attest to that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to apologize. Yeah. Just kidding. No apologies about it. It was definitely what made the band what it was, and it was an effective tool in a degree. But I think we were refining that tool of how do we stir it up enough that people are challenged to think, and how do we also not alienate people who want to join what we're a part of. And so I feel like, you know, we had been refining that over a couple of years. The band existed in the 90s, and I think we kind of picked up there. You know, we want to still challenge. We want to be, you know, sort of putting new challenging ideas out there and not afraid to be confrontational, but also to be a rallying point and a source of inspiration. Because if you are struggling for social justice issues on any level, and you've been doing it for a while, which I think we all are aware of, that can become depressing. It can become difficult. It can become discouraging. And so I think as we became, you know, as we sort of went through that, and we've all kind of been on that path since then, you find out how important it also is to have a rallying point, and how important it is to have inspiration. And so we're trying to balance those two things, the inspiration and being confrontational and challenging.
Well, and I could say, as someone who was very briefly a member of Racetraitor, in the time that we played shows when I was in the band, it was weird because you were already kind of, I don't want to say softening the message because I don't think that's the right word.
Yeah.
But you were trying to not be quite like, have not, maybe money wouldn't spaz as much.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a good way.
When the band started, the first festival that kind of kicked us off, which eternal gratitude for Alex Smith having us put the festival in North Carolina, which really kicked it off, and that was one of our first shows as a band. And so, you know, our approach there, which was very intentional. I mean, we would all talk. We would all talk for a lengthy time, and we were not nice, you know what I mean? And so, and it would probably, the ratio was like 20 minutes of talking and 5 minutes of music, something like that.
That's about right.
Yeah.
Because I joined when you guys were getting a little bit more progressive musically, a little more death metal, a little less grindcore.
Right.
But like, what I found was, even with you guys kind of trying to be a little less like confrontational in the sense of yelling at your audience.
Yeah.
People came to argue. That was like, it was like a badge of honor. People would come and argue with you about, and usually you would have them argued up a tree and they would still be saying the same thing over and over again, you know?
Yeah.
It was really weird.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, you know, because of, you know, we grew up in a pretty progressive area. We all had pretty progressive parents in different ways. And, you know, we all were like college educated. And I think for us, we were in the middle of our own process of awareness, and the band was very much like an outlet for that, you know? So it had that energy where it was all new, not new, but it was like, it wasn't new to us, but it was definitely, like we were constantly finding out more things, and, you know, kind of like mind constantly being blown by different events. And so I think that the band was just like a very raw outlet for that. And it was a raw outlet for what was happening on an emotional level too, because I think that is a kind of like a jarring emotional experience. So, well, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of, and then I think after time, the refining process was like, okay, now we're seeing how people are reacting, and we're having a little more information about how to become more effective. And, you know, we had people helping us figure that out along the way. And I remember after one of our first shows, and maybe it was our first show, like Martine from Krudos had a really like kind of like long conversation about it with us, and, you know, kind of like picking our brains too, and kind of like, whoa, you know, like, this is intense. And also like, you know, what's the goal here? And, you know, more maybe pragmatic things that he was a little more seasoned at it. So,
well, yeah. Let me ask you this, kind of related to that. Do you feel that like hardcore punk shaped your politics at all? Like, I know, like, for example, Decker, I feel like his parents were kind of liberation theology sort of people. Would that be correct, do you think? Or
well, with Decker, he was probably, I was going to say actually, with the exception of Decker, because he had been exposed to that reality from a pretty young age. His family would be like working at these orphanages in Guatemala, like after the, you know, after the like Civil War, and, you know, like sort of like, I mean, he was the one that exposed me, at least on a certain level, to like the next, like I was open and raised by pretty like progressive parents, but I was not like exposed to that kind of thing. And so there was a time when we were doing the band before Racetraitor, Hinckley, where he shared this documentary with us, which again, this is it's kind of funny. It feels like so weird, but I mean, it's literally like a fucking VHS tape, number one. Number two, that level of information was not like, oh, open my phone and put it into YouTube to look at it. I mean, you had to like obtain these physical items to get that information, and that was a much more involved process, and you might not find those things, you know, if you weren't.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think he was he's definitely a bit ahead of the curve on that, in terms of what he had been exposed to experientially.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask, like, as far as the music part, I mean, Decker just seemed to be much more sophisticated in terms of politics in general. Like he understood things, I think, on a level that I certainly didn't at that age. But
yeah, absolutely.
But like for me, like I would say that a lot of my like leftist tendencies comes from like even just like Metallica, at one point, but like metal and punk like that. I think that not for everyone, but for me, I mean, I wouldn't have a lot of the beliefs I had if it wasn't for that music. And I'm just wondering if that sort of shaped your existence politically.
It definitely impacted it. And I remember, getting into like, Anthrax and Public Enemy and Boogie Down Productions and one of the first hardcore bands, like proper hardcore bands I ever heard was Billingsgate, which is from, the burbs that we're from, and they're like extremely political. So actually my first hardcore show was Billingsgate in the Rock Room at Medusa's, and they would talk before every song, and they were talking about the first Iraq War. They're talking about pro-choice, like all, basically just like the same range of social justice issues, police violence, it was right around Rodney King. So like that was my template, I was like blown away. And, and so I think the ground was fertile, so to speak, but definitely the impact of music overall, for me, it was like a lot of both hip hop and hardcore. That were, and also, that's obviously a big influence in Racetraitor.
So when you look at the scene, the hardcore scene, you've seen, for the most part, it's always been left leaning, but probably from when all of us were getting into it, it's shifted even more left. But then as a whole, in that time, you've seen the country, I don't want to say shift more right, more overtly racist. How do you reconcile the fight that you guys have had, where it seems in the scene, you've been part of a positive force, but overall in this country, it seems like
that's a great question. So, I think that maybe one of the differences in the way the band came back into the hardcore scene is that, and again, we didn't really know how it would be received, is that it felt much more like we are just there as cheerleaders for what people are already doing and engaged in. And we're sort of just trying to provide inspiration and, money put at one point like a rallying point, and that, we're here as like a rallying point and something to get excited about. And then, but it's got to go out. It's got to go out the door into the streets and into the world. So I think that that's kind of the conceptualization of what we are now, is that we're more of and then it's just based on what the scene became. And I think there's sort of two things that are happening. One thing that's happening is the process of all of the racism, sexism, homophobia, all of that that has always been there, but really coming to the surface. in very visible ways. And then on the other side of it, though, there's been a huge reaction to it and a huge resistance to that. And so it's an interesting thing because it's not necessarily linear if you look at it. It's not like, are things worse or are things better? It's like, well, the bad shit's still there and people are resisting it. And I think, I mean, the interesting thing, obviously, in the last year was how the overlap of being in quarantine and then the George Floyd event, and then everybody out in the street and rallying, and how much did the fact that people were not working at home, more absorbed into what was going on, probably more time and energy, and then also the ability to just be like, okay, I can just go out and do these things. So I don't know. It's just an interesting correlation.
This is actually something I was thinking about probably the other day or maybe earlier today. But, you know, when we were in our 20s, you know, we were very, I would say, very, very pro leftist revolution. Like, we wanted a better world. And, but it never felt, at least for me, I don't know if you felt differently, but it never felt like we were going to be there. It was going to be a lot of struggles and just very minor, you know, moves. But now it feels like we're kind of in this moment in history that's probably just as insane as the 60s were in terms of political upheaval. And I don't know, like, do you feel that way? Like, did you, when you were, you know, when we were young, did you feel like, oh, this is going to happen, you know, when we're middle-aged men? You know,
I don't know if I thought it would like never happen in my lifetime or if I thought it was going to happen like next year. You know what I mean? I mean, I think you probably remember how absorbed in it I was, and in some ways probably a little delusional about it, just being young and not, you know, there's things you learn as you go along and you enter into the world in a more real way. But I mean, my opinion was, you know, if the people decide, that shit can go down tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I still kind of believe that from almost like a metaphysical standpoint at this point. It's like, you know, our ability to shape reality, you know, like, can happen. And it's about how do we, you know, do we turn that switch where that kind of like light goes on and we see that is reality. And I think in some ways, maybe that's what, you know, it was really astonishing to me overnight, the type of changes that could be made on a national level with the political will. You know, on a national level, these huge changes were made in the way we do life. And I know some people weren't doing them and all that, but overall, you know, people just like I remember getting in huge fights with people back then about, well, what do you think's going to happen? Are people just going to stop driving cars? And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, that could happen. You know, you could just decide not to do that. Like just willing to think about and question the basic assumptions about what we do every day, and that can have an impact. And I think that was the interesting experience. I don't know if people gained this from it in terms of their thinking about the world, but it was like, think about the sweeping changes that were able to be made with the political will to do it.
It's funny, as I think back to the first time or two that I saw Racetraitor, and I think for me the hardest part about the message was not the message itself, because, you know, if you had like a flyer with your platform like this was an election, I'd be like, okay, agree. But the way it was presented, it sort of forced me as somebody with a high level of caucasity, it forced me to really look at myself and go, I mean, although I'm not part of the problem, I'm part of the problem. And and that's a tough pill to swallow when you're like, I'm not. I mean, I grew up on the southwest side of Chicago, the Chicagoland area, where it's a bunch of I'm not racist, but people, and so like you have these built-in biases from just regular conversation that everybody was having in that area, and so just you're like, well, I'm not in the KKK. I don't wear a swastika. You know, it's not me, and when you finally it clicks and you just hear things out and hear other people's perspectives, and you go, you know what? I see now where I fit in on the spectrum of the problem. It's not problems aren't black and white. It's a really wide array of gray area, and you go, okay, I see where I fit in on the spectrum. You know, it's not white hood or your peachy keen. So, you know, as I've gotten older, it's funny. Everybody would say, "Well, when you get older, you'll go more right." And I've gone so much further left, and you know, it's just you start reading. You start off when you're able to say, "Oh, hey, I see where I'm part of the problem." Let me read and understand the problem from everyone's perspective. And the problem is, you know, it's a cornucopia of problems, you know, environmental issues, systemic racism, systemic misogyny, you know, economic inequalities. And you just start reading from the actual perspective of people that are most impacted by it. And you go, oh, hey, now I realize the scope of things. And it's funny is, you know, I go back to that and I realize how angry I was at you guys for the way you presented it. And, you know, without consciously doing it, I look back and I'm like, you know what, that probably, I mean, helped me gain a more appreciation of the issues at hand.
And maybe Dan will have a different opinion on this, but I think like my impression is that the western suburbs typically, whether south or north, like it was a lot more working class whites, which I come from a very working class background. So it's not me saying this as some like, you know, some dude who grew up, you know, in a very financially fortunate situation. But that's the thing is a lot of working white people, it's really hard for them to hear that when they're being exploited by capitalism. You know, and that was probably something that was hard, you know, on both ends to understand. Like, you know, and that was one of the big critiques of Racetraitor, as I recall, was, oh, you guys live in Wilmette.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that was the big thing. You guys are from the North Shore. You don't know shit. Shut up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, obviously as you get older, you realize the complexities and realities of different people's experiences. And for me, it was always a weird lose-lose situation because I was from the North Shore, but I was also, you know, growing up with a single mom in a, like, at one point it was literally like a 2-room apartment. So,
yeah, I was
like,
in there.
It
was not.
It's not fancy, and so that's, you know, but also don't want to pretend I'm not trying to pull that card either. It's like I could also just go outside and ride my bike 5 miles from my house and nothing's gonna happen. You know what I mean? Like no danger.
Or walk.
And I still get to like go to my friend's house who like lives in a super nice, you know what I mean? And it's like, so like even having resources around you, right? And having things like I can go outside and like the cops aren't gonna like fucking like pin me to the ground. And my cousin,
probably more importantly, is the school you went to was probably
incredibly funded. It was absurd. Probably better than some colleges. So absolutely, and you know, my cousin, my mom's family's from like a pretty like, you know, it's like a coal mining town in Kentucky, and so I grew up spending a lot of time there. I'd spend the summers there and see that reality as well, you know. And I mean, you know, there's definitely times where like my aunt and uncle were like using food stamps and stuff. But it was also the reality of going down to the south side of Chicago and seeing, like, you know, I remember one time I was driving in this van with the guys from this like activist group we were in, and we're doing a donation pickups in this van, and like they were like, oh no, it's back there, you know, and I'm like, oh okay, and I bust a U-turn, and two of the guys in the van were black, and they're like, what are you doing? Like, we're like terrified because I did a U-turn, and I was like, what? And they're like, dude, like the fucking cops can pull us over. That looks sketchy as hell, you know what I mean? And I'm like, you know, it's like a really small thing, right? But it's like this moment where you're like, this is like a fucking whole different experience as a human being these guys are living. Like, I did something I do all the fucking time, and if I get pulled over, I'll be fucking fine. You know what I mean? And for them, it was like, and I think I even realize it more now than back then, but for them, it's like, yeah, are we going to get like pulled over and like fucking arrested and go to, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, so there's these different levels of oppression, of poverty, and, but also the realities of being Black in America that cut across class lines. And you know, and you hear this all the time. Particularly police, you know, the way police presence could affect someone, the talk, all of that. And that affects people, regardless if they're making six figures, you know, it affects Black people, or if they're making, you know, barely making rent or whatever.
And to Rich's point, I'm sorry, Rich, but to your point where you talked about, like, you know, growing up poor white, being, you know, stuck in under the thumb of capitalism, you know, you grow up a lot of times with that mentality is, well, life's not so great for me either. And until you realize that, you know, it sucks for you too, but at least, you know, everybody around you was in the same boat, and you know, you commiserated. You didn't have, you know, more impact of, you know, having you know, police profile you, or being able to murder you, or, you know, it was well, you know, the reason we're poor is not because of the system that's been created to hold us down. It's, you know, well, Mexican people took our job, or it's because the money that would be helping us is going to food stamps, which you know, is the boogeyman.
Is a lie.
Black people with food stamps.
Let me ask you this. I don't remember if you were with us, Dan. There was one night, I think Wentz might have been with us, and it was Money, possibly Isaac. We were walking around Rogers Park, and this was a moment of illumination for me, in the sense that it took it from being something somewhat abstract to me. Yeah. Like, I believed that people of color were oppressed and were treated differently by police. But it was this moment when I saw it firsthand. We were walking around neighborhoods in Rogers Park, and there were these two Black teenagers pulled over by cops. The cops were just digging through their car trying to find something. And I remember we stood there and watched. And finally, as soon as they realized our white asses weren't leaving, the demeanor of the police completely changed, and they left. But it's just things like that maybe you don't see if you live in a largely white community in, say, I don't know, DuPage County or something.
Right. You don't see, I mean, Chicago's, you know, super segregated, and so you aren't, especially, again, you know, it's so funny to be this old now, but before cell phone cameras, you know, way back when we were kids, it's like the stuff wasn't, you know, those things getting caught on tape were very rare and very shocking. And even though you would hear and believe the stories, it is almost no way to conceptualize it without seeing it in those moments.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. Is, you know, I think, I mean, all of us have been in the scene for a long time, and just think about wild things that happened either on tour or going out of town for shows, and you didn't have any evidence of that happening, and you're just like, you tell the story, and sure, most of your friends are going to believe you, but it just seems so outlandish, and you're like, I can't, I have no proof of this because I didn't have a cell phone camera. I didn't have, one of those is some friends and I lived on the East Coast. We drove down to Baltimore to see a show, and my buddy's then girlfriend was supposed to be the designated driver, and this was back when I still drank, and my friend got wasted, and I had like, I mean, I had a slight buzz, and my friend's girlfriend got wasted, and I was like, we got to get home. Like, we can't, we're in the ghetto in Baltimore. Like, I can't, we got to get back to Philly. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to have some coffee and start driving. We get maybe a half mile from the venue, and I can see the ramp to get on the expressway. And then there's a police checkpoint, and they've got the street, down to one lane with cones, and there's 10 squad cars and police everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get arrested tonight. And I start driving through. Nobody says anything. Finally, I get to the very last cop before it's over, and I stop and roll down my window. And he just leans in, looks at the three of us, and goes, "You're white, you can go." And I'm just like, I mean, it was so shocking to be part of that. And you're like, you tell people, and I don't think they think you're a liar, but it's just, it seems so unreal. You're just like, I wish there was video of this to show you. Just like,
I mean, we had a thing like that.
It was crazy.
Back when actually it was that festival that Alex put on in North Carolina, and it was when the first Toy Story movie came out. And we were driving somewhere in the South, I can't remember now, and it was late at night, I don't remember, but I just remember it was late at night. We're driving somewhere, I can't even remember from where to where, but we had gotten I don't know what it was. It was that doll of the cowboy from Toy Story. And we had crucified him to the hood of the car and drawn a bullet hole in his head and kill Whitey or something. That was serious. And then we're driving and we get fucking pulled over. And this is the middle of nowhere. And we're all like, oh, fuck. And when we get pulled over, Money's driving, and Money's like, I don't have my license. And then we're like, oh, fuck. So pulled over, the cops take him, the cops talk to him. He's like, I don't have my license. They're like, come with us. They put him in the back of the cop car, and we are shitting our pants, and also really hoping they don't see this doll and what it says on it on the front of the car. And long story short, Money is a craftsman with words, and we got out of there. You know what I mean? No, I think he got a ticket maybe, or maybe a warning, and that was it. And I mean, no way is that what would have happened if it was, someone black driving the car. No way.
Yep.
In the South, I don't think. But
Racetraitor had been broken up for quite some time. I mean, it's probably not a shocking answer, but what was the
sure.
the scenario around getting back together? How did that come about?
I think there were probably a couple of years leading up to it where I had joined a local hardcore band. I was sort of getting back into playing heavier music. Over the time in between Racetraitor getting back together and ending, me and Decker over the years did a handful of random different bands, not heavy stuff. So we're still, hanging out, playing music, and all of us are kind of involved in different levels of, either political or sort of, so I'm in social work. So just a wide variety of different ways of engaging in the social change process. And I think as the as the visibility began to increase of all of these police violence videos, I was like, man, and at least for me, this is on my end. And again, over the years, I think actually, you know what, one of the things that started it is somebody wanted to, a guy from Chicago, Chris Zabitis, wanted to re-release Burn the Idol on vinyl, which we were like really stoked on because it never got a vinyl release in the first round, I don't think. Did it? No. I don't think.
No.
So we were really excited about that. And so we talked about it, and then I think he ended up not doing it because he ended up having a baby instead. But that in a way was like this impetus of this idea of doing the Burn the Idol remix and re-release. And then so that was happening actually. So that didn't happen. It died down for a bit. Then someone else picked it up. And I lived across the street from Dallas, from Pelican, who is married to one of our old friends from back in the 90s. And so we had been hanging out and I was telling him, and he was getting into recording and mixing stuff. So he's like, yeah, you know, he's like, I'm trying to like build up my thing with this, and I'd take a shot at it. So like, okay, cool. So we just like go to his house and work on the tracks. We got all the tracks. We did, you know, the tracks were on like 2-inch reel, got it all transferred to digital. And then he started working on it, and money would come to town, and, you know, his parents are still here. So we'd sit down and mix. And then that was a process. That was like a year or something. But as that was happening, and then simultaneously there was that increase in the visibility of all these videos coming out of police violence. And it just, I don't know, it felt pretty organic. And then there was some like, kind of like, I don't know what the resurgence, but there's a little hype around it. Like I think on that 90s hardcore group, there was some, you know, buzzing happening. And then like, my partner was like, you know, she's like an internet sleuth. She's like, oh, check this out. Check out, people would like talk about your old band all the time on the internet. And I was like, oh, I didn't know, you know, like I didn't know. And she's like, yeah, check this out. This is the hashtag and da-da-da. And so then I was like, wow. So it's this like pretty organic thing. And then, you know, I think there's a little, but people were saying, oh yeah, they should do, you know, a reunion show, da-da-da. And there's a little, you know, momentum that way. And then I think at some point we're just like, fuck it, let's just do this, see how it goes, and go from there. So we didn't even really know we would get back together as like a band. We knew we were going to do this reunion show. We decided to write some new music for it. We went out and recorded with Andy, and then just sort of, you know, the reunion show felt good, and it was great to reconnect with everyone. And sometimes there's this thing that's there, and it was there. So that kind of drove it, and we kind of agreed to along the way. It's like, you know, we're not going to like milk this thing when it doesn't feel like it's got that to it anymore. Then we just stop.
Yeah, I think I remember messaging Money before I knew you guys were actually doing anything. I remember the chokehold incident. That seemed like the moment where I was like, holy shit, all this stuff you guys talked about is now almost kind of commonplace in hardcore punk. Like it would be so much easier for you to have been a band 20 some years after the fact, you know. But like, yeah, because the guitarist of, do you remember that?
Oh, the chokehold thing with the Jeff. Yeah. Now I know what you're talking about.
The All Lives Matter shit.
I am not familiar with
we're
this,
doing
so
some
you might have to
reunions.
fill me in here.
And their first show, they have this song on the second LP that's about cops, you know, and how they hate cops. But Jeff was like, you know, it doesn't matter if you're white or black, you know, they fuck with all of us. Fuck police, you know, like kind of, which is whatever. But someone like in the audience called him out. It was like, no, you know, cool, grandpa, you know. But basically he kind of died on the All Lives Matter hill, I guess. And it was just funny because the kid who called him out was kind of saying things that Racetraitor was literally 20 years before that, you know? So
Yeah.
it was nuts.
And I think just to, you know, and then I think he like either left or was asked to leave Chokehold, and they kept going. Just because Chris is like 100% on board, you know what I mean? Chokehold is, man, they're totally like not down for that. So I just thought that's worth mentioning. But the funny thing is, we had it out.
Oh yeah,
we had it out with Jeff back in the day too. At a show we played with Left 4 Dead, and you know, I mean, I think, you know, obviously we like reconnected with Chris because Andy's in sect with Chris and laugh about it now and all good vibes or whatever. But back then, he, you know, it's sort of like he was just more or less, I think he was like into being like kind of like just messing with us, but
he was a shit
he
stirrer,
just enjoyed that punk rock aspect of it. But we got into it pretty big after a show with them, with Jeff, not with Chris really, but with Jeff definitely, and sort of, you know, big argument and all of that, Racetraitor style as usual. So then when that happened, it was like, oh, we knew this the whole time.
Well, you know, it's funny. Just one other story about that show. I wasn't in the band, but I was at the show in Canada, and Decker was wearing Brujeria t-shirt, and someone's critique was that he was wearing a shirt of a band that's on Roadrunner, which is funded by, you know, whatever, lots of corporate interests and this, that, or the other, and, you know, arms manufacturers, which, you know, but I mean, it's so.
I mean, he was wearing you know, for the record, he was wearing a shirt that said kill white people. So, you know, at the time, that wasn't a common sight.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was lots of shit like that. I remember even before I was in the band. Like,
so, you know, now as somebody that's been around for a long time, and you start to see folks like John Joseph and Chaka from Burn come out with these conspiracy theories
on what the rhetoric is that they're coming out with. I know
rhetoric,
I mean,
all over.
I have no idea what it is, so you have to fill me in a little bit.
Well, I mean, it started with the anti-vax, and then started down that whole slope of.
He hates Al Sharpton.
That
I remember. He called Al Sharpton, you know, a racist. You know, just it's a very non-nuanced things.
Or John Joseph did.
Oh, John Joseph.
Yeah, it starts down the. Yeah, but the two of them have even gone on back and forth on you know, Instagram comments and Twitter about you know, agreeing with each other's stances and like an echo chamber. I mean, it's, you know, do you feel with the fight that you guys have had that you're like not surprised when I see quote unquote like heroes of the hardcore scene, you know, start loudly with this rhetoric, or you know, are you still disappointed at some level?
I mean, we played with Burn a couple of times. Whoa, that's okay.
Sorry,
we played with.
My cat just knocked over my iPad.
I thought you were coming at me with the steel chair for a second.
I was about to say, Rich, are you
you know, we played with Burn a couple of times, and you know, kind of like hit it off with Gavin and those guys. But you know, I don't really know what they're on. I don't think that stuff has like a defining impact. I don't know. I mean, I guess this is maybe on a larger issue. It's a product of the information age. It's a product of the information age, and it's a product of the failure of public education in its ability to teach critical thinking, which it doesn't teach, and it's not, I mean, it might now, but it wasn't designed to teach critical thinking. It was designed to keep people sitting in a chair doing a mundane task for 6 or 7 hours a day. And so now it's gone, and I know there's a lot of teachers that make it good and they push it, and there's movements for reform, so I'm not slamming that at all. But I'm just saying, I think it's a product. I mean, in the same way that I think in some ways, like the Trump phenomenon and that whole movement, which, I mean, you could really trace it back to the Tea Party thing, and you could go back even further to the first time that, you know, we had a non-democratic, you know, election winner with Bush Jr. But I think it's all that, to me, goes really to this issue of education and critical thinking. And it's, so you have this contrast, right? You have a contrast of, you have access to all this information. And I know people, a generation down, may not realize how different that is, but it's quite different than before. I mean, I remember going to libraries and in college and having to sit down with fucking like microfiches of old newspapers to look at, you know what I mean? Like, so the information age explosion, and then contrast that with like public education just failing, you know, in terms of teaching people to critically think, and mix that in with like mass consumerism and, you know, the indoctrination of Americans into just becoming fucking consumers. And so you get people who are, they have, I think, you know, natural drive towards critical thinking, questioning things, deconstructing things, which is great. And then, but maybe like information isn't always good that's floating around out there. And so it's easy to get on board with things that aren't maybe necessarily substantiated.
It's funny is, you know, I am have a lot of education, and I'm a professional. I don't want to talk about what I do, but you know, I run into a lot of people that, you know, they want to understand, they want to be able to apply this information that they're able to farm from, you know, the internet, but they don't have the tools to assess, to critically evaluate the validity of what they're reading. And because there's, you know, there's obviously things, you know, where you're like, yeah, that's very clearly not a real thing. But even something as far as medicine goes, is they don't know what it is they're reading, then they can't differentiate between what might have a very big bias and what is a more sound literature. And you're right, the education system has really failed people into being able to critically think that and understand what it is they're reading. And we have a generation of people who are so biased against expertise that it's almost like a generation Dunning-Kruger, where you just, well, I know.
I think also part of the problem is the simple fact that people feel like, and it's not, I mean, it's not completely unsubstantiated, but that they've been lied to every step of the way by, you know, by government officials. It's a really fucked up situation because in a weird way, it's the chickens coming home to roost. You know, and but yeah, I mean, I obviously I don't take those stances where I'm going to get a fucking you know, COVID shot as soon as I can, and if I get sick, that sucks.
I already got the first one. By the way. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was a very, again, had a double dose of like
I got mine
huge underlying anxiety relieved that I didn't even know that was there. You know what I mean? It was like pump out and then getting that shot, and I'm like, oh, god damn. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, like you could see how it would happen too, right? Like, okay, like the veganism, it's like, okay, you discover that there's all these horrible aspects of meat and dairy industry, and that's being promoted as healthy, or that's being promoted as the norm. So you're like, okay, things are bullshit. right? So you could sort of see how like the momentum will grow where, you know, people can slip in other things that aren't true, but it sort of feels true. Or it's like, oh, okay, I could believe that because I don't trust the larger system.
So, you know, I don't, not to backtrack here, but when you look at Racetraitor from where you started, musically, there's been a progression. Is how do you think that progression came about? And was the band musically driven, or was it you know, you guys wanted to have the message out and then use the music
absolutely.
as a tool, and then
I mean, we're all lovers
progress
of
from
music.
there.
You know,
can you talk about that
and
a little
I
bit?
think as many people who get into hardcore, you know, it's such a powerful experience to enter that community and get into that music, and definitely at a time where most of the music was very infused with political messages and questioning society's norms, and that was a hugely attractive aspect of hardcore versus like, not that metal didn't do it, but you know what I mean. It's sort of like, it felt like a definitely in the 90s more defining aspect of hardcore, and that was exciting, fun, and inspirational. But I think like there was an interest in music, but for I think all of us, like it was always joined together. It's very hard to like separate it. Like there wasn't an experience of like, well, maybe there was one or two, but that was when I was probably like 11 or 12. I do remember the moment I heard like, started hearing like metal for the first time, and just sort of that feeling of excitement and like, what is this? You know what I mean? So that was there, but it pretty quickly joined together. So, I mean, I don't know. I think like most of the bands I've been in are political. Maybe like one band I was doing for a while wasn't really, but it was sort of like, I guess I was using it as like a break, because that's like what my job is, super intense. So like, yeah, you know, I'll just do this as like a fun thing, which I think can be good too. And we need, I mean, I think there's like a certain level of escapism we all need to sustain being humans and activists in the world, you know? And I think in some ways that's useful when it's balanced. But, you know, growing up in the 80s where everything was so like bubblegum and sort of bullshit or whatever, if you weren't into like something subversive intentionally, I think that has sort of like changed in some ways now. I don't know if I answered your question. I just rambled about music. I guess I was thinking out loud. It was a good question. So how do you want me to summarize it in a, oh, yeah, it was. It was, you know, it was a sort of
as a band,
pretty organic evolution.
What was that evolution?
Like, you know, we were into a lot of bands, and our band before Racetraitor was more grind. It was very political. It's just more of that like abolition vibe. And then Racetraitor continued that. And then it was actually, there is in my mind a defining day where it became more metal. And this was the day. Me and Carl and maybe a few other people were out at Reckless Records. They had a used Deicide Legion CD. He picked it up, and his older siblings were like super like musician metal guys, and he picked that thing up and he's like, "This thing is sick," you know. And I'm like, "All right, I'm gonna fucking buy it." So I bought it. We went home, we put it on, and we're like, "We gotta incorporate this into what we're doing." And he was the drummer at the time, Carl from Kill the Slave Master and Creation's Crucifixion, and then about a month later, he calls me. He's like, "Dude," he's like, "I found this kid. He can do Deicide beats, no problem. He's like 16." And I was like, "Okay, rad."
Little Andy.
And Carl is a shredder on guitar. He's actually really good at drums too. And he's like, I'm like, "All right, let's go up there and jam." So I drove up there, and we played this. I think we were playing the riff from Cast You Down, and we started playing that. And me and Carl and Hurley kicked on that double bass, and he had actual double bass drums at the time, which was also louder, when you have the two drums. And we're playing that riff, and me and Carl look at each other while we're playing this riff and just start laughing because we're so stoked on this dude's drumming. So that was it. It was like, all right, we got this dude, metal, let's go. And then in the reformation of the band, we're drawing from some of the progressions and things that are happening in metal now. So just trying to like make it still like kind of like musically relevant or whatever, and stuff that we're into, like more like some black metal influence and just modern bands that are sort of doing the heavy stuff well.
What do you find yourself listening to now? Do you still listen to a lot of the same stuff, or
what's funny? It's kind of like what you were saying with politics. It's like I always thought, okay, at some point I'll just like not be into metal, and I definitely went through a phase where I just was listening to more like psych rock and not really much heavy music. And then I had this hardcore band for a couple of years, and just like local thing in Chicago, and brought this bassist, and he started getting me back into a lot of like more modern heavy music. And so then I got sort of like obsessed again with heavy music, and started to go down like gear rabbit holes and that whole thing. And so like a lot of like, actually I think this is like, they're just, for heavy music, this is just like some of the best. This is like the Renaissance or something. There's just some amazing stuff out there, and it's just incredible what people are doing.
Are you talking about Racer?
Yeah,
is that
the band Racer is with the dude who Brian Peterson, who wrote the '90s hardcore book.
Yeah, it's funny. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's like, I was in a rut for a while where it's just like nothing but I listened to old stuff, or at least stuff from my 20s. And I have a new record label that I'm doing, and I started forcing me to listen to newer stuff, and I'm just like, oh my God, there's so much good stuff out. And one positive takeaway of the quarantine has been so many people are writing music, even if they're never planning to tour and they don't live in the same city. They're they're just writing good stuff. Like it's incredible. Yeah, and you guys just did with the 4-way split. And I didn't know the other bands on there, but I just got it in the mail not too long ago, and
rad.
I'm like, man, I'm just blown away. Like, just
just pulled up my Spotify to try to see what I had been listening to recently, and here's like that band End. Have you guys heard End?
Yeah, I think Will told me about them. I actually like
Triptychon, Crowbar, classic. Gojira. I probably shouldn't admit Gojira, but I do like Gojira. Immortal. Ulcerate. Have you guys heard of that? So I get into a lot of like metal, I guess. The hardcore bands, I'm like kind of basic. It's like Nails, Code Orange. I like really enjoy those bands. Like the production, they're just fucking brutal. Oh, this black metal band, I don't know where I found this. It's called Melanoe, Melinoe. That is, oh dude, it blew my mind. So it sounds so good. And Rival Schools, United by Fate. It is. It's a great record.
That's so good though. It's funny. Like I know Walter from Gorilla Biscuits, and obviously it's always going to be a huge influence on me. But
were you at that? Do you remember when Rival Schools toured on that United by Fate when they still had the other guitar player? I'm trying to think where the show was. Were you in Chicago? Are you in Chicago now, or?
I'm in Chicago now, so I'm from here. And
I
moved to
totally
East
just
Coast for a
aged
while,
myself.
and
That
then
fucking show was
been
probably
back
in like
for,
2010.
geez,
Do you know what I mean?
10 years.
It seems like, oh, that was not that long ago. I was like, yeah, that was a long time ago, dude. You're just old.
Yeah.
Oh, dude.
Well,
So many
it's
things
no,
like
no
that.
joke.
Where I'm like, oh, that's
I
like
still
anything
can't
after
wait to
2000.
last
I'm like,
Super
oh,
Bowl
that's like
record.
the late era of that band, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's weird for me, like living on
It's wild. I'll
East Coast
age
at the same
myself
time
so much like
Sean
that.
was there, like early aughts to, I don't know, I think I left around 2007. But like, there's all of these like American Nightmare. I swear I saw American Nightmare at least 10 times, probably more than that. And it all seems like it happened last week. Like it's really weird when you meet someone who in some cases wasn't even born the first time I saw American Nightmare. You know, like it's,
Yep, it's happening, man.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's like, you know, I lived in Philly for a long time, and you know, I remember there was a young kid and who was in this band called Victory Strike, and he went to jail for something, and I would write to him in jail regularly, and you know, then he went on to do a horror show and nothing, and you know, it's like, man, it's like I vividly remember him being like a 16-year-old kid living in town, and now he's on the cover of like magazines, and you know, he's like a, you know, music darling, and you're just like, geez, like how did time fly like that?
Weird.
Like, what happens?
Well, we should start wrapping up, but I was thinking for a fun question at the end. I think we'll probably have similar ones, but what was your favorite vegan food from the late 90s?
Oh, man. Chicago, no contact. Come on. No contact. Soul Veg.
Soul
and
Veg.
I got to tell you something. When we did, I think it was after the first practice, we did back to even see if we were going to do this. We're like, let's get together and jam, you know? So we get together and play, and then we went to Soul Veg, and in my mind, I was like, because, you know, like things got real, like vegetarian and vegan food got really good all over the city, and so there wasn't the same necessity to go to Soul Veg there used to be, and which is a haul. It's like a 3-hour ordeal to go there and back. So I was like, yeah, I'm like, I wonder if this is like good anymore. Like compared, like, you know, Chicago Diner is incredible now. Like there's just so much good stuff out there, and the technology of that food is so amazing. Like,
do they still have the
all the
barbecue
classics,
choice?
man? And guess what? It still blows everything away.
It's so good. I remember when I lived in Philly, and I think it might have been the first time I came.
Yeah, of course.
Is just I don't even remember how it came about, but do you know Big Tim and Joe Lifeline?
Yeah.
The three of us like went in the middle of a snowstorm all the way from the south side to you know, the southwest side to Soul Veg, and parking like in a snowbank, like with the tires not all hitting the street because we're up the ground, for Sunday dinner. And
I know.
like the three of us are big guys, and like we're just like plowing through some Soul Veg, and I'm like, man, I can still taste it, you know. And you're right. I don't know.
75th Street is not close.
Well, hey man, you gotta, you know, swing by one day. We'll do another run. I haven't been in about 3 years, and now we're talking about it, making my mouth water. Yeah.
Oh, I know. It's like, you know, it's funny. I know I'm going there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna have
it's like a 3 or 4 hour investment, you know, to drive,
I've had in a long time.
chill, wait for food, comes out, then you eat way too much, you know, and then drive back. So, but it's worth it. It's so good.
Well, hell, I remember I used to make like probably at least once a week. I would take the train from Logan Square to Andersonville to get spinach pies at that spot.
Spinach pie is still one of the best places. Those spinach pies are untouchable. And I didn't know this back then, but I lived in Andersonville for like 8 years, and Niraj turned me on to it. There's a place across the street from Spinach Pie, and
Yeah, I've never
They're
been, but I've heard
falafel
about it.
wraps and they're lentil soup, and then you can get fries on the side. It's like extra bonus. Yeah, it's good.
God damn. Now I miss Chicago more than any.
They don't have that. They don't have that level in Louisville, huh? Okay.
No.
There's so much good food, man.
You guys have
That's true. I'm just waiting for that.
but you guys got KFC Yum Stadium.
The vegan Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah, I was
chicken
about to ask you if there was because it's sampled in some cities, right? Like they're doing the restaurant.
Yeah, right before the pandemic, they had it in like Tennessee. Like it wouldn't have been a long drive for us to go. It would have been probably about an hour and a half. But like we could have gotten down to like near Nashville. I think way down in Kentucky, like you could get it too. But yeah, no, it's not standard yet. Oh, did you get real quick? Just because now we're talking food, did you get the vegan shawarma at PJ?
Dude, I think someone did tell me about it, and then I forgot, and then I saw that thing, and I remembered, and I was like so stoked. So I didn't get it, but my birthday is Thursday, and we're celebrating it Friday, and we're gonna have that for my birthday.
Nice. Vegan shawarma.
You know, Money and I have talked for years about taking it because his mom used to make vegan Persian recipes, and we've talked for years about trying to start something with that, like a food type of thing, like a restaurant or food truck or company or something. And now though, with that Grounds Beyond, I can like make you can really easily make the proper Persian kebabs and those things. I mean, I don't even need to leave my house anymore. So offer stands for both of you. If Rich, if you're in town, or Sean, you want to swing by, I'll make some vegan kebabs there.
That would be sweet. Yeah. So my daughter's 6 now, and we're homeschooling, and we're trying to do this thing where we teach her every week or every other week about a new culture, a new country. And we before the pandemic, we were going. The nice thing about Chicago is pretty much if there's a cuisine, there's a restaurant here in Chicago, and trying to hit up a restaurant so she can try the food, to learn about it too. And my daughter is a lifelong vegetarian, and so a lot of the recipes, the restaurants aren't going to have any vegetarian options. So we've been using the Beyond and the Impossible meat and stuff, and making all these like traditional recipes vegan and vegetarian. And it's been awesome, just expanding what we make. And it's funny that we've you sort of fall into a lull when you have a family of Tuesdays meatloaf night and things like that, where you just have a regular, and it's like we've expanded our repertoire.
Absolutely
of just teaching our 6-year-old about food. I guess the only thing
we had recorded a bunch of drums before the pandemic for songs at Electrical, and so there, and then I have like sort of prosumer / amateur recording stuff at my house that I've slowly been building up. So we are in the process with Money, and then me and Decker jam, and we're just going through the songs with like a fine-tooth comb and finishing material for another LP, which will come out, I'm gonna guess, probably maybe at like September or something of this year.
Nice.
Thank you so much to Dan from Racetraitor for joining us today. This is going to do it for this inaugural episode of Nothing Better to Do podcast, and we want to leave you with a couple of Racetraitor tracks. These are both from the 4-way split with Neckbeard, Death Camp, Closet Witch, Hagathorn, and Racetraitor. These songs are Sarcophagus and Subordinate Terror.